Okay, what is NeurOptimal and basically how does it work? One of the things Val loves to say, and I thought it was important to put in here, is every session is the first and the last. Now, what he means by that is because your brain is in motion always, and because when you sit down and you get those sensors on your head, this is what your brain looks like, and it continually mirrors it back to you, and your brain is continually responding to it, then the next time you sit down and you put it on, it will never look like it ever did before because it's already responded that many different times. So every single session you do is your first and the last. It will never look like that again. Now, the interesting thing to me about that is not only does all of the environmental things change that for us, so it will always look different, but mirroring it back always also makes it look different. So what is NeurOptimal? We all have probably heard this before. It's safe. There's no need for a diagnosis. It is training, not treatment. It has a set of these proprietary mathematical transforms that are in the time frequency envelopes, and the mathematics that are used are the joint time frequency analysis that create those unique time frequency envelopes. So for those of you who have never seen a session, you're just looking at this for the first time, if we go back to the thought of that feedback loop, what you'll know is that when someone comes into the office, they usually, somebody explains the process to them. Typically, they'll sit in a really nice, comfortable chair, and most of the time, lights are turned off. Mark and I are always really, really, really careful to ask people because, we're very aware of the fact that when people come into you, many, many, many times, they don't feel good. They may not feel safe. They may not feel supported. They really don't feel good. Life doesn't feel good to them many times. Now, other times people are coming in just for fun and just, I've heard about this system and I really want to try it and peak performance and all of that. But we always were very cognizant about some of the things that kind of triggered people. One is we tried to always set our space up so that they were never sitting with their back towards the door. They didn't know who was walking in on them, and that would make them feel uncomfortable. So we always tried to rearrange the room in a way that always kept their back to a wall of some sort. We always would we'd always ask them if they're comfortable with the lights on or the lights off. Because of our office spaces, we always had fluorescent bulbs. And so we always had a lamp that we could sit close to them. And if they wanted to keep it on low so that it just, had a little bit of light, we would do that. It was always interesting. Once they did feel safe, they always would say, do you mind turning the light all the way off this time? For us personally, we always had a big screen TV, and it was as big as we could fit in our space. And then we had surround sound. Most of the time, the computer comes with earbuds that you can use. We personally don't use the earbuds. I like the idea of it being within this room so that, I think sometimes when people have a lot of trauma also, if they have things poked in their ears, they feel like they are not going to be able to hear the danger when there is danger. Now, obviously, there's no danger in your office, but they don't always know that. And so I never put earbuds or earphones on them unless I was working with like 2 teenagers and working with language disorders, and they both were there at the same time, and I had 2 different systems going at the same time. Then I would put a headset on them. Now they could still hear me and my voice, they could still hear the other teenager, but they were really listening to the music within the headset. So we could go that route, but for the most part, it was just surround sound. I had speakers that allowed it to be encompassing and huge screen TV for them to watch. That way, if they wanted to close their eyes, they could. If they don't want to close their eyes, they don't have to. And then I would explain that it's going to be about a 33-minute process, and I need to touch their ears. It's an interesting thing. Again, when people don't feel real comfortable yet, this is pretty personal. For somebody to play with your ears is kind of an intimate thing. And so I would explain where they were going to go and how I was going to touch their ears to put these things on, that the paste might be a little cold. Then we would go ahead and do our 33 minutes. Now, I never once showed them that mirror matrix. And when they asked me what I was looking at, I'd always say, I'm watching a different screen, and that different screen gives me an indication as to whether a sensor falls off, or whether I need to rearrange them in any way, or whether it timing wise we're going through the process. But I never ever would explain it in a way that made them think that I knew more about what was going on in their brain than they knew. It was always geared towards a mutual respect in that way. What I was trying to help them understand was that they're in charge of their own body, not me. And that is, we can talk about that. We can, did you feel anything? And if so, what was it? Would you like me to make record of it, their name on it? And then I usually would either give them a journal that they could keep. Those of you in Canada who cannot use our progress tracking tools, a journal is a great way to do it. We also had we take little videos with the iPad, and I would just say, as you explain to me your story and what's important to you, I'm just going to videotape it. If for some reason you don't sign up for this process, I'll eliminate it immediately. If you do, I'd like to use it as monitoring the changes that are going on. I don't talk about it as the progress, because it is what they need it to be, and that might be a lot of progress. It might be, I just feel normal. Good, that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. And so that's kind of up to them as to what they write in their journal and what I write in my journal. But that picture, that video is so powerful, because you're able to see if their shoulders are up or down. You're able to see how they're holding their jaw, and whether they're talking really, really, really fast, or whether they are just kind of relaxed and moving and, feeling good about their body as they're talking. And all of that is so noticeable, and mostly noticeable to them. That's not how I look, is it? Well, that's how you look. This is how you tell your story, how you present yourself. And it really is powerful when you do that same video 10, 15 sessions later, and they can compare those two. They see such a change. It's phenomenal. So it's a great, great, great way of helping them notice the differences. So we talked about the brain and process variability. We want to talk about the NeurOptimal and process variability. Again, because the brain is infinitely cycling and self-regulating, so is NeurOptimal. It is constantly in one 33-minute session, 256 times per second. It is infinitely cycling and showing you the information so that you can self-regulate. We understand that there is no absolute value, and when we say that, we mean that in terms of the actual NeurOptimal process as well. We don't have specific values that you're moving towards. You will be better when you hit this mark. We can't create that mark. If you think about, and I think there's actually a picture in here in just a little bit about it, but if you think about surfing on a great big huge ocean wave, there is not an exact position that you have to be in that you will be able to stand on the surfboard to make it all the way up to the beach on that wave. Instead, there is a feel that you have to have. and you have to play with that feel until you feel internally in a place that you're comfortable at. So you're moving away from discomfort always. And Mark mentioned that earlier as we were kind of talking about how the brain is constantly moving away from discomfort. We are always doing that. You know, if we stand on a piece of carpet and all of a sudden you feel a little, pebble, or maybe the dog left a little piece of dog food and you stand on it, you immediately get off of it. That's uncomfortable. It's not the way it should be. For many special needs children, I don't know how many of you have worked with special needs before, but you notice that they are so much more tolerant of things that are uncomfortable. You almost have to teach them what is comfortable and what is not comfortable. Can you feel the food on your face? Let's wipe it off, because we don't feel good when we have food on our face. So we're most always moving away from discomfort. And like I said, sadly, some people you have to teach what that feels like. And that's what we do with NeurOptimal, is we're training people to understand and feel the changes that are occurring. So and that always changes from brain to brain. It's never the same. It's never the same for that same person. Every time I get on the system, I feel different afterwards. I never feel the same every single time. I don't always do it and think, all right, that's a great feeling. I have felt that. Other times I do it and it's like, well, I know it makes me feel better, but I didn't feel that this time. And that's a real important thing to tell your clients too, because if they do it the first time or the second time and they feel that big surge of difference, but then the third and fourth time they don't, they may come back with, I don't think it's working anymore. I don't think it's working at all because I don't feel a difference at all. Well, you didn't need to feel a difference that time. You had changed and you were in a place and within your own central nervous system that it didn't make a big change. You didn't feel the change. So sometimes those real subtle changes is what you as the trainer are going to have to help them through, is looking for those little things. Well, you came in and you said that you didn't scream and yell at the driver next to you. That's a pretty powerful thing. And so it's sometimes just finding those and looking for those, what they would think is pretty subtle, or I don't know if it really was NeurOptimal that did it, or that kind of thing. A lot of times the way we'll talk about NeurOptimal, we not only talk about our central nervous system is this way, but NeurOptimal is this way, is an orchestra. Each of the orchestra members each instrument would be a different frequency level within the orchestra. So that would be the music that we hear is every instrument playing at the same time. If you had, say, the trumpets that are playing way too loud, then that amplitude or the volume of what they are playing would be a difference from this well-rounded orchestra that is playing. If they are not exactly on the same frequency level, they're close, but they're a little bit off, then they might be a little sharp or a little flat. That could be the frequency not being what we would call a pure tone, not being exactly. Or if they are, kind of out of sync, or out of, just off a little bit, then we see a little bit of a flutter with a shift. So we call that shift a flutter. That just is almost like a wobble within the instruments. So for the conductor would be the central nervous system, or the conductor within the NeurOptimal system is the software program. And maybe even more specifically, those time frequency envelopes. And they're the ones that are constantly telling the central nervous system, hey, there was a change made. One of your frequencies is too loud, or is holding their note too long, or is doing a staccato and not sustained at all. So, we can use, again, another analogy with your clients as you try to explain this, of the balance beam, the orchestra, the wave, each one of these is the idea that this is a very natural approach. Okay, Mark.
Inline adaptive denoising. I talked a little bit earlier about kind of the first step in denoising, okay, the way the Z-amp is working through and deleting some of what this noise is in the environment. But now we have another level of denoising that is happening in the software itself. Remember back early on, we had those two sine waves. The first one was very, very consistent, very similar to this one here, okay? Same distance from here to here to here to here to here, okay? This is what we'd call very sinusoidal, okay? It's a consistent sinusoidal path. And Lisa touched a little bit on it, in that everything man-made is going to be very, very consistent like this. We've beat around the bush and we beat directly on the nail that our cortical activity is anything but consistent. It is chaotic. So one of the great things about this system is it has the ability to say, this is very chaotic, therefore I'm going to pay attention to it. This is very sinusoidal, and I'm going to just ignore it. And so it's what makes us able to have the microwave going right next to the person, if you were doing that. Or, we actually had an office that we shared. We went into a chiropractor's office once to see some of his clients, and we were right on the other side of the wall from an x-ray machine. But everything that x-ray machine put out, into the air was very sinusoidal like this. And the system did a tremendous job of ignoring that. And we got equivalent results with those clients as we did in a very quiet electrical environment, such as some of the offices that we've had all over different places. So it's not particularly important that we have to be in a low external electric noise environment. I always try to do that if I can, just so the system doesn't have to work as hard as it does when it's there. But I know that the system is going to basically just ignore that stuff. And this is exactly why. It ignores the sinusoidal. When we talk about our electrical grid here in the US, we talk about it's a 60 hertz electric grid, meaning the electricity coming down the walls has a 60 hertz cycle, a 60 cycles per second. Europe, it's a 50 hertz. There's something to change in your system. If you're in a 50 hertz environment, the system will set a denoising default, and if we're in a 50 hertz environment, we'll set it to that, just so it gives it another step up on what it's going to ignore. So what NeurOptimal is doing is detecting change. This is what our central nervous system does. It detects the outliers. If you just go through your daily life and notice what your attention is drawn to, it's drawn to that is different. I think Lisa early on gave that example of the deer grazing next to the road. In most of a deer's life, it's in the woods and it's quiet and a twig snaps in the background, and obviously that's different. But it can be grazing next to the highway with the 8 lanes of traffic and tire noise and horns and trucks, and truly a tremendously chaotic environment. But in that moment, that's the norm. So it can absolutely exist there, continue to graze until that twig snaps. Okay, it's drawn to that difference and that change in the environment. And that's exactly what NeurOptimal is doing too. It is monitoring that individual that it's hooked to in that moment, and it's highlighting changes and shifts within that cortical activity. This is the information that it's gathering and information that it's giving back to the client in the form of those breaks in the music that, hey, there's a difference here, and it's up to you to deal with that information however it makes sense for you to do it. And honestly, one of the ways to deal with that new piece of information is to ignore it. Say, nah, I think that's okay. I'm shifting, but maybe I'm shifting in a positive way. We'll touch on that again in just a second. So what the system is doing, it's highlighting shifts and motion and differences in the EEG, in that electrical activity that we're monitoring. And many times that looks like a flutter. Actually watching deep into the numbers, you'll see this little flutter as we're shifting from one place to another. And it's very, very much like the fluttering that a hummingbird does. Just on the cusp of change, just on the cusp, and during that shift, you'll actually hear a difference in the hummingbird's pattern, their wing pattern. And so we've got a little video. When you listen really, really closely as that hummingbird is pulled in just before it starts to pull back, you'll hear that flutter in the pattern as it's beginning to shift. In some ways, that's exactly what we're monitoring in the stream of data. We're looking for that aspect of, hey, you're beginning to move, you're beginning to shift. Is this something you want to do? And after you get that a repeated number of times, the central nervous system's really good at figuring out, yeah, that's what I want to do. I needed to move back from that. That's a good shift. Or, gee, when I went the wrong direction, it sounded like this. So just a lot of fun to try to equate that to hummingbirds. The elegance of capturing that EEG fluttering is basically we can ignore those linear measures, the power, any of those type of things. Lisa talked about the time frequency envelopes. I'm going to show you those. But these are groupings of frequencies that we are monitoring the activity within and between. We're looking for that flutter and that shift and that movement in and between. We floated the idea of joint time frequency analysis or time frequency envelopes. This word time is something that you'll see within NeurOptimal, but you will not see in any other system. Remember, the linear systems, you're just looking at frequency and amplitude. That's it. But once we've built the time component into this, now suddenly we're able to look at our flow of data over time, and now we can actually monitor speed and momentum, because we know 5 seconds ago we were here, now we're here, and at a point it gets really almost predictive, but we're not. There's no part of the math that's actually predicting that you're going to go somewhere. It will say, hey, some of this activity is fluttering, it's accelerating, it's speeding up. Start to give feedback as if, here's something different. Is this something you really want to do? So that information that comes back is just the break in the music. So that's really important to understand, is that the music is not truly a part of the feedback. It's just a carrier for the information being the breaks in the music. In this sense, it's actually the absence of sound that is the information that we're providing. Right? And remember, we talked about the central nervous system and how it's keyed into recognizing differences. So the information it's getting is the break in the music. And that's why we're able to use any kind of music that we want to use. You don't have to use the default music, as good as it is, but you'll notice that the music that comes with it is constant. From the beginning of that session to 33 minutes later, it is constant music. There's a constant carrier. And many times when we use different music, there are some very purposeful breaks in the music. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. Okay? And if some of our information, some of our breaks fall in those rests, those breaks in the music, it's sort of a lost opportunity to learn. So we've cut back the amount of information we're able to give in the session. It's only down to 90% maybe. I can't think of a song that had more than 10% breaks in it. That would be a little bit odd. It still works though. So if the only way you can keep the client in the chair is to play music that has some natural breaks in it, understand they're getting a lot of good information in the other, and the goal is always to get them through the session, get as much information provided to them as we can. The same thought process with movies and other media that we have the ability to play. With autistic kids, they'll never want to stay in the chair, but they've always got one thing that they're obsessing on at the moment. And for one, we made 33 minutes of Clifford the Big Red Dog clips. And another, we did those Celtic women that were singing songs. You know, just whatever would keep them in the chair, understanding that maybe we're not 100%, maybe there's some standard breaks in it. You know, 90% of 33 minutes is a whole lot better than 100% of 3 minutes. Functional targeting. This is how the brain receives crucial information. It is basically mirroring back the activity in our central nervous system. And we're doing with that what is best for us, remember, to move away from discomfort. If you're going down the hall and you see yourself in the mirror and your hair is sticking straight up, an uncomfortable place for you visually at least. So you'll immediately just reach up and pat it down. Food on your face, spinach in your teeth, you know, we're just mirroring back those differences, right? And we're doing with that as we want. We always have the ability to say, you know what, today's the day I'm comfortable with spinach in my teeth. And move on. It is always free will. For the most part, we'll always automatically move away from that discomfort in that way, just with the mirror of our current activity. And here's another mirror, just driving home the fact about a nonlinear dynamic approach is only mirroring that information back. And remember, 256 times a second, we're looking in this mirror, and it's giving us that information for us to deal with. Lisa talked earlier about turbulence. Hear this on some Facebook posts. People will talk about turbulence, and some people will mistakenly say, we're going to reduce the turbulence in your central nervous system. They may say brainwaves, honestly, on that. It's not that. It's not that we're decreasing turbulence in our cortical activity. We're learning how to live within a turbulent environment. You know, there's nothing we can do to stop the waves in the ocean. We can't decrease that turbulence, but we can give feedback to ourselves on how best to ride those waves. So, slight distinction, but an important distinction. And the last point here about it's not one size fits all, not a plug and play. You know, we can get lulled into that because we, as providers, do the same thing with everybody, don't we? We bring them in, we sit them down, we hook them up at C3, C4, we press start of the same software program, and we allow it to go. So from an outside perspective, we do the same steps. But with all of the intelligence built into the system now, the system is different every time for every person, and for that person every different day. Because remember, that person is different every single day. So it's responding to the current activity and dynamically changing along with it. So because of all that, these other points, assessment's irrelevant, diagnostically agnostic, we don't care what their complaints are. We just need to let them train with the system. So let's talk about this treatment zone aspect of this. and the thing, don't go there. If you're doing something with NeurOptimal and you see the word treatment, or you see the word diagnosis, or you see the word protocol, that is really moving it into a medical model. And being diagnostically agnostic, allowing them to train, okay, training, not treatment, is where we need to be for a number of different reasons, one of which many of us don't have the background that we can be practicing medicine and diagnosing people. You know, with the other linear systems, people have sometimes been to a 1-week course. I did this myself. Lisa and I have both been trained on those linear systems back in the day, and then go out and you read these QEEGs and you say, well, you've got too much of this and too much of that. It's truly practicing medicine, and that's a dangerous place for some of us to be. And one of the comforts of using the NeurOptimal system, because we are non-medical. None of these words, therapy, protocol, treatment, none of that. And very comforting to me to not have to do that. Often very, very subtle changes. In children, we use the smiley faces to kind of follow those changes. But like any journey, they come in and they have a complaint of something. They want to get there. Every journey starts off with small steps. And so a big part of our job is to help them notice those subtle changes. And we can't ever predict exactly what they're going to be or what order they're going to come. Someone whose biggest complaint is anxiety may only be looking to some anxiety markers and not really realize that they told you when they came in for their session today that they had the best night's sleep they've had in years. Oh yeah, but my anxiety is still the same. Well, we're taking those steps and we're getting there. We just, you know, the way their system is responding, it's responding with changes in the sleep before they recognize that the changes in the anxiety. Probably they're having those changes. They're just not recognizing them yet. And like it says here, it's not uncommon for them to all of a sudden say, I feel a lot better. Well, they didn't take one big step to get there. They took many small steps to get there. So one way that you'll hear some people refer to neurofeedback is these rumble strips at the side of the road. But I want to clear up that analogy, because yes, the rumble strips are there to show you when you're having a shift, you know, a change in your path, if you will, a movement in your activity. You're no longer right between the lines. You've started to fall asleep, or you know, it's serving its purpose. And I want you to think bigger about that aspect, because yes, if you're on the road and you're starting to fall asleep and you're having this possibly dramatic shift that you're starting to run off the road, and the rumble strips say, hey, here's some information, you're starting to run off the road, you wake up, you break out in a sweat, you get back onto the road, and you know, you carry on, right? And that's where most people will stop with that analogy. But what if you were realizing that you were starting to fall asleep and you needed to trade drivers, or you needed to change a flat tire, or there was something else going on in your world in the middle of that path that you needed to make a detour. When you hit that rumble strip, it's going to be exactly the same information you get as if you were falling asleep. And you're going to say, yeah, now this is what I want to do. Go to the side of the road, you do what you want to do. And when you start to accelerate again and you change drivers or whatever, you're going to hit this, and it's going to give you that information that you're in the middle of a shift. And you're going to say, no, this is good for me. This is the way I want to go. Truly, I'm moving away from discomfort. I'm going this way. So there are questions about interruptions in the neurofeedback program. Does it all mean that it's a bad thing? Well, absolutely not. It's just highlighting to you that you're in movement, that you're in shift, that you're fluttering, that use any of these words that we're talking about. And some of them are good and some of them are bad, and we intrinsically figure that out. The other thing, off the subject here, but we've talked about the good and bad information, good and bad breaks in the music. Understand that those are mathematically driven. Whether you are a client that has traumatic brain injury or stroke, or you're way down on this end of the spectrum, or you're a corporate executive in the 98th percentile and you're upset you're not in the 99th percentile, and you'd say there's nothing wrong with me, I just need to respond quick or whatever. Listening to the neurofeedback system for either of those two people, either end of that spectrum that we're all on somewhere, you're going to have substantially the same amount of breaks, because that's just mathematically driven. The system expands and contracts to whatever your activity is to give about that kind of break. Hopefully, everyone's accepted now that our cortical system is a dynamic system. And, so many of these terms, they're not NeurOptimal only. There is dynamic system theory. There is joint time frequency analysis in other realms. This isn't things that Val has made up. He's brought them together in this process. And I want to spend some time on this slide because this will really answer what we addressed earlier on why we don't want to do the entrainment things at the same time, why we don't want to do those vibrational mats at the same time. Any dynamic system, there are 4 agreed upon control procedures for that dynamic system. Okay? And these are the 4. One of them is extrinsic constraints. You can constrain a dynamic system. If you're on forums and you're talking to people that have been in this any length of time and you're talking about a client's progress, many times you'll hear them say, well, let's talk about what extrinsic constraints could be there. And basically, it's anything that limits the full range of response from that system. A great analogy here is you own a speedboat. It's beautiful, it's waxed up, it's in the water, it has the ability to go 90 miles an hour across a lake. It has a tremendous capability. But as long as it is tied to the dock, it is extrinsically constrained from reaching its full potential. Everybody would buy off on that. Now, when we think about how this works in our life or with our clients, some of you that are on our therapists or MFTs and things, family dynamics, easy one, absolutely can be an extrinsic constraint. Many times we've worked with children, they start making changes and the family dynamics just won't allow them to change. You're the bad kid, you're always going to be the bad kid. Well, this is a little better, but you're still doing this. One of the reasons why I always think if in that situation, everybody in the house needs neurofeedback at the same time. Someone that's complaining about sleep disorders, is there a street light that, do they have drapes and is there a street light shining in their eyes? Is there an owl nest right outside the window. I mean, it's some odd things to think about, but what else could be constraining them from getting a good night's sleep? What else could be constraining them about getting better in any way? What's keeping them from moving away from that discomfort? We've actually gone into a client's house and taken all of the electronics out of his bedroom and rearranged his entire apartment, from the location of the bed to getting the computer and things out, because he's grabbing his attention and he was leaving the monitor on at night. So we went in and did our best to remove at least those blatant extrinsic constraints. Medications, vitamins, supplements, any of these things can be its extrinsic constraints. Birds chirping. We talked earlier about binaural beats and entrainment CDs. Those will fall into a couple of different categories. But if the NeurOptimal is trying to teach one thing and the entrainment things are forcing something else, that's absolutely putting them in the realm of extrinsic constraints. The second one you saw there was chaotic perturbation. I have always referred to this as herding cats. You know, you can herd cats. You can jump over this side and clap your hands, and jump over to the other side and jump up and down, and you can, you know, get on your hands and knees and try to move them through the doorway. You can do that. That is a control procedure for a herd of cats, isn't it? It's just highly inefficient. And by definition, what it is just randomly changing controls, seeing what happens, and then changing something else. I would hope that that never happens in the cockpit of an airplane, but this is really what linear neurofeedback does. It is changing something and seeing what happens, and then changing something else. And I'll give you just sort of a description of how that works. You know, they've come in, and this is the other thing, the linear. They've come in for their QEEG. Okay, they've had their trainer, technician, whatever, say, you have too much blank, you know, whatever. They've come up with some diagnosis. And they said, okay, great, I've got a protocol for that, and I want to see you 20 or 30 times, and then we'll reassess. Well, you know, they'll do a few sessions, and the client will come back and say, man, I had a migraine headache last week that was, you know, horrible. And they say, migraine headaches, I've got a protocol for that. And they'll jump to a different set of frequencies and augments and inhibits and do that and send them on their way. And they'll come back and say, I had the worst night's sleep ever. And say, sleep disorder, I've got a protocol for that. And they'll change it around again, different augments, different inhibits, different frequencies, and send them on their way. And so, one, they've gotten completely away from any value being in that prior diagnosis, right? Two, they're chasing symptoms, not in the moment even, not in the day even. Maybe that migraine headache was 5 days ago. They're not having one now. And it's very similar to this, just kind of here, push here, you know, grabbing whatever is popping out and trying to herd it through the door. And a good technician can make that work. We made it work and got good response most of the time. Just a highly inefficient way to control a dynamic system. So we've talked a number of different times so far today on entrainment and migraine. By definition, what's happening here is they've decided you need more, you know, for this, you need more 5 hertz. You need more theta. Someone's made this determination whether or not you do. If you're complaining about sleep, they'll pick a different frequency. If you're complaining about anxiety, they'll pick a different frequency. If you're complaining about focus, they'll pick a different frequency. And they'll basically introduce that into your system, whether it's through music, and most of the time it is, but there's an overarching dominant something that they introduce to your system in hopes that you will say, oh yeah, 5 hertz, I need more of that. I'm gonna generate more of that. And once you feel that, the thought is that you will then stay there. Here again, entrainment works. I mean, it is a controlled procedure. Typically, it only works while that dominant whatever is there, is being introduced. We don't learn anything from it like we do from the NeurOptimal system. We don't learn how to get ourselves into a different place. We've simply migrated to something that we're kind of forced to do. And when that dominance is taken away, we'll move away from that. We'll move back somewhere else because we don't really know how to stay there. People entrain though. I mean, it absolutely happens. Our heartbeats will entrain to clock beats on the wall. The classic example of all the girls in the sorority start to cycle together. It is a control procedure. Again, in our estimation, not the best for long-term learning and staying there. You know, once the girls leave college, they all go back to some other. They can't call each other a year later and say, yes, we're still synced up. It's another one you can see, hopefully, that if you have more than one of these going on at a time, how they could be really counterproductive. You know, here's just a real fun little thing. Metronomes, all set the same and all started in different directions. These will, and you'll see it here in a second, after just a very short time, start to cycle together. It's just the way they'll work. And the fourth control procedure is called synchronization through chaos. And this is the realm that NeurOptimal plays in. It's recognizing the chaotic nature of our central nervous system. It's syncing up with that chaotically. I mean, you can't say that NeurOptimal is doing anything on a linear basis. Okay, so we've got the two chaotic systems syncing up, and NeurOptimal basically talking to the central nervous system in the language that it understands. It understands those changes in its environment, and it uses that information to learn and to move away from discomfort. So you can understand if we're talking to the central nervous system in its language on one hand, and it's learning from that, and it's moving, it's getting more comfortable, and then we have these extrinsic constraints not allowing it to change past a point, or we have, you know, family dynamics not allowing it to change, or we have some other entrainment thing trying to push and pull it in a different direction. You can hopefully now understand why we want to understand these other control procedures and be able to look for them with our clients, help them recognize them, and hopefully move away from them. You know, we say some things many times throughout this day and diagnostically agnostic is one of them. We don't do that just to be mean and to stretch out the class. These are the important concepts that we know sometimes we need to come at this way, we need to come out this way, and these are the things that we really want taught, we really want learned. Please don't get frustrated at the redundancy of some of this, because just notice it and say, you know, quite possibly there's a question on the quiz that says something about diagnostically agnostic because they keep saying it. So no matter the diagnosis or condition, diagnostically agnostic, okay? We don't do anything different in any way. And we allow the body to take itself to their own optimal. And we're not saying, boy, your 7 to 12 hertz needs to be no higher than 5.4 microvolts. Your optimal might be 6.2 microvolts. We don't know, we don't care. And we're not gonna ever look at that number, because we're just going to allow it to get to the point that's best for you. In a quick recap, we're analyzing shifts and or flutter, whatever terminology you want to use, in the electrical activity. We're sampling that data 256 times per second, and those shifts and flutters are triggering that interruption of sound, and the brain will self-regulate with that new information. That really sums it up. 3 little boxes sums up what's happening. So, and what the brain is doing with that information is perceiving that interruption, even if it's on a non-conscious level, okay? We don't hear all of the interruptions. The hardware and the software have evolved to a point that so many of them are really on a non-conscious level now. Actually, what you're hearing is when a number of triggered breaks kind of pile up on top of each other and form one longer break. Okay, there are actually 20 time frequency envelopes that have the ability to trigger those breaks, and so 3 or 4 of them are happening at almost exactly the exact time. It's going to pile up and end up with one longer break. Okay, and that is the feedback. That lack of sound in that otherwise continuous stream is our information. So we're providing that notification for the brain to self-regulate, depending on its needs within its abilities and its limitations. We all have our own abilities and limitations. We've talked openly about our daughter's limitations. Hopefully you get to meet her maybe tomorrow when we hook up sensors to the best of that person's abilities and limitations. We work with so many autistic kids. We're not going to take away their autism. NeurOptimal just won't do that. We've worked with people suffering from Lyme disease, made great strides with them, but it's not going to take away Lyme. Okay, so it's going to operate to the best of that person's ability. Okay, and like we've said many times, regaining that intrinsic resilience and flexibility.